episode 11 with Frank Mills. We're out on tour with Frank on the west coast of Canada. We had a night off, so we decided to do a podcast. I had a ton of fun. Frank is a fantastic guy, and been working with Frank for a few years, and I've known him for a long time. And such a great entertainer, great piano player, great writer. Of course, he's written one of the most recognizable instrumentals in the world. It's unbelievable everything he's done in his career. So excited for you to listen to this. Here we go. Okay, I'm here with Frank Mills, and we're in Olds, Alberta, which is just north of Calgary. And this is our day off on the tour. And Frank graciously decided that he'd come up and we'd hang out and chat for a while on this podcast and find out a little bit more than most people know about Frank Mills.
There you go. Here he is in Olds.
Yeah.
With Darren.
It was a good, nice little drive today. It's a little chilly.
It is. Blay.
It's gray, yeah.
Gray and wintry looking out there, but we're here. We're having fun.
So, Frank, I know. You were born in Montreal?
I was born in Montreal.
Yeah.
Lived born in Verdun, which was a sort of a central suburb down there by the water.
Yeah.
And at 5 years of age, we moved to Mount Royal, which was, I guess, in my parents' view, a step up.
Yeah.
My dad's business started to do well, and as a kid at Mount Royal was really a relatively new town.
Yeah.
It was once called Model City, and then they decided that was a bit arrogant, so they changed it to the town of Mount Royal. But it was an ideal place to grow up in as a kid. I mean, I first of all, I had everything I could ask for in terms of bicycles and whatever,
Yeah.
And the kids around the block also had the same thing. It was just a post-war community of men who decided they wanted to work hard and make a little extra money. So they also drank too hard usually and ate too much.
Well,
but so they died young. They died young,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any other brothers and sisters?
I have a sister, Kathleen. She's 4 years older than me.
Yeah.
Lives in Peterborough now. She's
okay.
in retirement. Her husband and her are both retired, and they like Peterborough. Nice little city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you started playing piano pretty young, right?
Yeah, really voluntarily, Darren. I just gravitated to it. It was in me. There's no doubt there was some genetic thing in there. I don't know what it was, but I certainly loved playing piano. I never had to really be pushed into it. I was just as happy to be practicing piano as I would have been, and often did, playing soccer outside on the street or hockey or what would you call it? Street hockey. I guess.
You wonder. This conversation comes up all the time. You wonder now if you were in today's era, whether all the distractions nowadays with the internet and your iPads and all that stuff. You wonder how many kids get a little distracted from that. But I think if you have a strong angst to want to do something, you do it.
Yeah, and I think, if anything, the options have increased. You have much more choice in today's world, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
It can be frustrating. It leads to long lines at Starbucks and stuff like that. But I think eventually I would have gravitated to music anyway.
Yeah.
So there was something there, some latent. All of my uncles and aunts on my mother's side were musical. They all played an instrument. So with a family band, they tell me they had.
Yeah.
And my dad's side were more the Irish type of singers in the pub, well aided and abetted by a few belts. but the family home was full of music. My dad loved classical music, and subsequently I gravitated toward that too.
Yeah.
And,
Did you start with lessons?
I started with piano lessons when I was 7. That seemed to be in Quebec. That was sort of the guideline age to you're either too young to absorb it or too old to too late to get into it. So 7 was the mean average, I guess, which I think was late.
Yeah.
I could have started at 4.
Yeah.
I was that musical, although we didn't have much of a piano when I was 4. And that too improved when we moved to town of Mount Royal.
Do you remember your first day of lessons?
Very well, yeah. Mrs. G, she was a nice lady, and I went to her house on my bike.
Yeah.
In those days, you could go anywhere on a bike and never even think twice about it. There was
Yeah.
no question of crime or getting mobbed or anything else. It was a very safe community to live in. And so we walked all over the place. I walked to high school every day. That was half a mile in each direction. So,
Yeah.
And I spent lots of time in the evenings with band. Was Wednesday night, 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock, and we walked to school again and played with band practice. I took up trombone when I was 12.
Okay, yeah.
And loved it. It was a great instrument as a songwriter in particular, or even as a composer of music. It was. It's an instrument much like the violin that's played without there are no stops. And so training the ear was really a great way to go with trombone.
Yeah, it is, because you have to be right on the money or right off the money.
Yeah, well, it's all here too. It's guiding you.
Sure.
Yeah, your stops are limited to your ears.
So how long did you take? Mrs. G, you said it was her name?
Mrs. G and I were good friends until I was about 10, and she sort of said to me, I think you're ready for some higher learning in piano.
Yeah.
And she put me on to a guy named Martin Louis. He was a French teacher of music at the University of Montreal.
Okay.
And he took me the next step into the classics. And I remember studying a lot of Chopin and a lot of the great classics that were written for piano. Of course, piano was probably one of the first instruments to be around that played all the notes of the orchestra, the wide range of the piano and the keyboard. So I gravitated to that in a peaceful transition. I liked him. He was a great teacher. Man, he could play too. He knew his stuff. And so he was great about allowing me to choose my repertoire that I wanted to play. I always remember Fantasy Impromptu was one of my favorite Chopin pieces. And he said, well, have you played through it or have you looked through it before you want to start learning it? And I said, no. And he said, well, the second movement, it's tough. He said, you're biting off something I don't think you're ready for. And I said, well, that's fine. We've got a few years to fix it, don't we? He said, oh, yeah, go ahead. So I was able to play that first part of it, and then it goes into a very rapid, lot of chord changes and some fancy finger work that I think it took me about 3 years, and we sort of put that on the side while I was learning other stuff for my technique.
Yeah, I'll come back to it every once in a while.
Came back to it every once in a while, and he was quite right. And after about the third year, I used to play it flawlessly, and he was very proud of that. So it was great.
I think it's good to, I know when I was learning different instruments that I would always pick something that I knew I couldn't play. I knew it well, but you worked at it. It gave you something to really push towards.
Yes.
And I think when you just kind of gradually, step by step, that can be a little monotonous. But if you have something that you're hoping to achieve and really go for it, it really pushes you along, I think.
Yeah, I think it's good mental exercise, too.
Yeah.
And your brain, of course, at that age is very absorbent. And I just loved it. It was very fine for me. And then when I went into high school, he retired, I think, from the school thing and secretly wanted to give up teaching. And I felt, well, that's fine. I'll take up trombone seriously now in grade 8, I guess I was, in Quebec, 12 years of age. And studied trombone with several other instructors for 4 years.
Wow.
Played in high school, the band. There was a high school orchestra. I played in that. Then we had our own little jazz band.
Yeah.
And that was 3 nights a week by the time I was finished. So Friday came along, I was looking for a holiday.
I bet.
And then we play in our own little dance band that we had at school, which was really fun for sock hops and stuff. And, and that was great training, of course, for the future.
It's great. I mean, unfortunately now, I think a lot of high schools don't have the music programs like they used to. And I look back very fondly on those music programs. And I know when I went to high school too, we had the orchestra and we had a jazz band and a stage band and a vocal group, and that was really important years, I think. I mean, it really, not only musically I don't think you realized what you were learning musically at that time. For me, I didn't. It was fun, but you were still really learning different elements of music, even though it wasn't all classical, or there's some pop, there's a little bit of this, and you got a real taste of a little bit of everything.
I think also that music, it wasn't obvious in the beginning, but as my family history evolved, it was certainly very important to me emotionally.
Yeah.
It was an outlet for my teenage emotions,
Yeah.
Which were developing at the time, for better or worse, in our case, in the family. But I think that was an important part of music for me in my life. And also, there have been studies made very obviously, kids who go into music, their marks are better. Now, I don't know why, or there are the reasons shown by psychologists, but that seems to be a fact these days. And I have to say that all of the kids I remember being in the band have done very well. Whether you can correlate it or not, I don't know. But Mount Royal in its own self was a community that offered endless opportunities for kids. Absolutely endless. You could do whatever you wanted. And they had, I remember the camera club. We had a very nice dark room set up, to develop pictures, and cameras that were really quite exceptional. They were all donated by different companies. So I was in the camera club, and then I was in the ski club, that too. At one point in time, we were taking 8 buses every Saturday to the Laurentian Mountains and back for a ski day for $4,
Yeah.
And so that was another opportunity. And between that, the camera club, the music, the ski club, and all my musical events during the week, my noon hours and evenings were filled.
Yeah.
From Monday to Friday.
You didn't have time to get into trouble.
Didn't have time. No, not at all.
No.
And it was fun. I mean, there was a spirit between everybody involved that was positive, and I think that played a large role in our development for years later on, when you still have all those choices to make, but you gravitate to people who share the same interests.
Yeah.
And that's important, I think, for the development of our confidence. Mm-hmm. And the ability to just take other people for what they are, and to realize that we're different, and respect that.
Yeah, exactly.
If you didn't want to play the trombone, fine, play the oboe. You know.
So at that time, what? Obviously, you had a strong interest in classical, but what were you listening to other music-wise besides that?
Well, I would practice my 20 minutes of a supposed hour every day. I would practice playing my classical stuff and program that Dr. Lewis had given to me, and I'd practice that for 20 minutes, and then inevitably I'd burst into Heartbreak Hotel and Blueberry Hill and Fats Domino and Ray Charles and all the great, the Everly Brothers. They were all big hits of the 60s or 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And then the Beatles, of course. So I was always playing pop music.
Yeah.
And I think I learned even then at a young age that probably when I was around 10, I realized people like to listen to me play the piano. And it wasn't in the ordinary sense. Mm-hmm. There was something there that I knew they were enjoying it. And then, of course, it became obvious at McGill when I was practicing piano for my composition class. And there were 8 rehearsal studios on the second floor of the music faculty. And you would be assigned that you'd work out your schedule every week, and you would either be there at 2 o'clock every afternoon or whatever time you wanted, but you'd reserve that room for that hour. And I always used to get a kick out of it because once again I'd be rehearsing the pieces I was supposed to play for the curriculum. Yeah. Then I'd burst into Ray Charles again, or at that time, the House of the Rising Sun, the Animals, and all that stuff. And when my class was finished, or my hour went by, I'd open the door, and all the young secretaries from the office were outside the door listening to me play all this pop music. Yeah. They didn't give a damn about the classical stuff either, you know. So I knew then, in a sad sense, because I'll never forget Richard Gresko, a nice guy and really good friend in the music faculty. And Richard practiced piano in the studio next to me, and he could play circles around me. He was in the concert piano training class to be a concert pianist, and he could play circles around me. But unfortunately, his repertoire was, Stravinsky and all sorts of really difficult stuff to play. And I was sticking to the nice melodies of Chopin and Ray Charles. So
he probably just playing over people's heads and just didn't.
It didn't realize. I didn't do it on purpose. Yeah. It was my choice. I just did it that way. It was me. And that got me into more clubs and situations that have been beneficial for the rest of my life. Why did I get into the Trout Club? Oh, because he could play the piano, you know.
Yeah.
And there was a lineup of 20 people waiting to get in. No, we need the piano player, you know. So that opened a lot of doors that way.
So when you finished high school, to zipping back a bit, you wanted to be a doctor, right?
Well, by the time I finished high school, both my parents had died of cancer, which was really a knock. Here I had this idyllic living situation, a comfy little bedroom of my own with whatever I wanted, the bicycles. I remember my first BSA British bike, you know.
Yeah.
This was hot, you know, and I got that, I think, when I was about 16 years old, 15 years old. And then my folks died, and the whole thing turned upside down. I really had a difficult time, and that was just before I started college.
Wow.
I spent 1 year at McGill while my mother was alive, and she died that Christmas. So in my first year of college. So, and I was I wanted to be a doctor. I guess I was influenced a lot because by the time I was 10 years old, I didn't think they were dying. No child ever thinks his parents are dying, but I knew they were sick.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I kind of realized, well, I'm going to have to start taking a lot of responsibility for myself if I want to do something. I've got to do it. I can't ask them to do it. They were really, you know, not well. And my dad in particular suffered immensely with it. And so I guess by the time I was 18, when Mom died, my sister moved into the family home for a year. And then she started having babies every year. And I was in college, and I thought, you know, I think I'll just join a fraternity down there and live there.
Yeah.
Which was a great bonus for me. There's a lot of negative publicity about fraternities, and I suppose we had our moments too as young men at college, you know, and young women at college. But I think McGill was great for me because, first of all, I was surrounded by guys who were very supportive of each other. And also, I guess I ran into their parents and whatnot who took me under their wing for a short period of time, all of them. There were several different families I bumped into and bumped out of and went on to another one. And that helped me through what I call the years of intense depression that I fell into.
I'm sure you did.
And it was tough. So that's really the reason why my marks went down at McGill, and I got kicked out. I flunked, and you were only allowed to flunk once there. And I remember the dean called me, and he said, I hate to tell you this because I think you'd make a good doctor, but he said, you're out. You can't handle the scholastic curriculum to become a doctor. And I found that hard to accept because I thought, I'd always had top marks in high school. And it wasn't hard to achieve, you know. And all of a sudden somebody's looking at me straight in the face and said, well, you failed 3 exams. I have no choice, but you got to go. So, and then the irony that happened was when I quit, or got booted out is more like it, I was walking down past the music faculty and the building there on McTavish Street in downtown Montreal, which was part of the McGill campus, and there was the music faculty, and I thought, and none other than Bill Walker, who had played in the high school band, came out the door and walked down the stairs. I hadn't seen him for 3 years.
Wow.
And Bill he used to call me Rack, because I always jazzed up Rachmaninoff, and he loved it. He'd sort of stand at the piano and sing. He had a great voice, and he'd croon while I sang. This is in high school, you know. So Bill and I became great friends, and he said, well, what's happening? Where are you going? I said, I think I'm going to go and join the Navy. I just want to get out of here. And he said, you can't do that. Come up and take the music entrance exam. And I thought, well, I got nothing to lose. So half an hour later, the dean of the music faculty is phoning the dean who just threw me out of college. And he says, this guy Mill's pretty talented. We'd like to have him in the music faculty. So Stansbury, I could hear the conversation over the phone. Stansbury said, well, it's okay, but don't blame me if it doesn't work out. Yeah. That's how I got into music. So, and the 2 years I spent in music at McGill were all about songwriting and composition. I was not in there to become a concert pianist.
Yeah.
I was not there to become a school teacher of music. I was there for the simple reason to learn how to write music. And it was so beneficial. The 2 years, there were only 2 guys in my class, myself and Hugh Hartwell. And
wow.
Don't know what happened to Hugh.
Yeah.
But we studied composition for 2 years together in that class with Dr. Anhalt, I remember him very well. Very inspiring teacher. And once again, fate had put me in a situation where I was with some of the best to work with, and I realized it and took advantage of it.
Well, I'm sure it was a great, considering your parents passing and that, and then you're in a course that you're writing music and composing, that you had a lot to pour out.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
And that probably was very helpful for you to be in that course.
Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto and I became the best of buddies.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty deep thing,
Yeah.
Beautiful melodies, but piano-wise, there's some amazing passages in it. You got to be pretty good to play it.
Yeah. So you finished up with McGill. Where did that find you at that point?
Strangely enough, it found me wrestling with some complexes that I was beginning to develop, some serious mental handicaps. Neurosis is a strange thing. I studied it with a psychiatrist for 6 months, but not until I was about 40. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me until then. And then I realized that every time I had an extra couple of beers, I turned into a different guy altogether.
Oh, yeah.
It was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation, and I thought, this is going to land me in trouble someday if I don't fix it.
Yeah.
So luckily, over the years, I realized I had read a lot of books about it. I talked to a lot of different people in psychiatry and psychology about it. And not until I was about 40 years of age did I end up with a psychiatrist in the Bahamas, of all places, who was a wonderful guy and set me straight. But there were all those years after I left music. At McGill, I was 65 when I left.
Yeah.
And my father had always been very supportive of me in any respect, but I think out of his desire to protect me, or at least guide me, he said to me one day, "Your music is wonderful. You'd probably like to go into it for the rest of your life," but he said, "I'm not so sure you'll make the kind of money you'd want to have in the business to allow yourself the freedoms we have now."
Yeah.
He was talking blatant money here. This was all about money, which has never turned me on. And at the same time, he would say, well, make sure that whatever you do in life, you like it. Because there's nothing, work becomes play when you look forward to going to work every day.
Exactly.
And that's what happened when I really took music seriously. So 4 years later, after McGill, and 2 jobs in industry.
What were you doing?
Well, I was a salesman for Union Carbide, industrial welding and gas supplies. I mean, here's piano playing Frank. And even there, I got a reputation, playing at Christmas parties for the company and various parties that were held. Oh, is Mills? Yeah, okay, Mills is coming. Well, good. We'll have some fun there, and he'll play the piano. That happened for 2 years with Union Carbide. And interestingly, my boss said to me, I know you want to make some money, he said. I think you'd really like to go into music. You've said that a few times. And he said, I know you want to make some money just to give yourself time to go into music and not have to worry about money for a year or two, which was true. And I said yes. And he was really very kind to me and open-minded and very paternal. And he said to me, why don't you go into industrial real estate? He said, you're a good salesman. You can make a lot of money there if you work hard. Yeah. And then you can do what you want to do. So I was there at A.E. LePage Industrial Real Estate for 2 years.
Wow.
I made a fortune as a young man, and certainly had enough money to buy a nice grand piano, live in a decent apartment, and not run out of money for a year.
Is that still in Montreal?
The apartment, you mean?
Where you're working in?
Yes, they're still in Montreal. Oh, sure, yeah. And he was, the boss at LePage, Lauren Cook, was a nice man, too. I guess one of the constant inputs in my life has been that for whatever reason, I run into some really nice people. And the old expression, I guess, is not what you know, but who you know, has repaid itself many times. And I've just been very fortunate. I've met these great people who sort of took me under their wing and took me in confidence. I found it unusual that Paul Dawson, my boss at Union Carbide, would say to me, I know you want to go into music. You're not going to make enough money here to do what you want to do. Why don't you go into industrial real estate? That to me really astonished me at how honest these people were. Yeah. And Lauren Cook was the same way. When I said, Lauren, I've been with you for 2 years. and I'd like to leave and go into music full time. And he looked at me as if I were crazy. He said, you're our best salesman. You'll be vice president of the company in 5 years. I was only 29 at the time, or 27.
Yeah.
And I said, I know that. And I said, I've enjoyed working with you and everybody I've met here, great people, great experience, but time to go into music, push whatever I can, open doors whatever I can, just to see how far whatever talent I have will take me.
Yeah.
And that's the spirit that I entered the music business wholeheartedly, unabashedly in 1969.
Wow. So when you made that decision, obviously you left. What did you have to go into? Were you just kind of starting from scratch? And
yeah, really. Rumor had gotten around somehow that I'd had bands in college all the time. I always had a band playing at... to me, it was more fun to play music at the sock hop than to go to the hop itself.
Yeah.
All musicians can relate to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather be playing than down there dancing.
Yeah.
Not that I was less interested in girls than any other guy, but we just had bands. I remember even in high school I had a band, and I came home one night and my dad said, well, are you making any money at this? And I said, Dad, they paid me $15 myself tonight for playing the piano, which I love, for 3 hours.
Yeah.
I said, it's about $15 back in those days was probably, $150 today.
Yeah.
So he thought about that, and there was a smile on his face. This was back when I was about 15 years old, and he said, well, I don't know. He said, you do what you think is right.
So in those bands, just basically more...
Oh, there was a piano, bass
guitar.
Usually an acoustic guitar and an electric guitar.
Yeah.
And the acoustic would inevitably end because unless they were mic'd, they couldn't compete with it.
Right.
And my piano, unless it was mic'd, I couldn't compete with it, which led to me to play high up on the keyboard because that's the only place I could cut through the electronic instruments. Hence, I still play up top.
Yeah.
It's a habit.
Yeah.
And my melodies tend to be tinkly, and certainly the piano pieces, and I tend to use the upper part of the keyboard more than the lower one.
Yeah.
Although I did develop the funky bass, I realized in playing solo piano, and if I wanted to play those rock tunes, I had to come up with the equivalent of the bass section, guitar, bass, and drums. And that would be my left hand. So I formulated a method of the picking up on the last beat of every bar and then playing the downbeat.
Yeah.
That usually happened with my thumb and my fifth finger of the left hand. Ba-boom, 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 like the bass. And then you'd play the guitar strumming off that with the pedal down, the bass holding the note. You'd play the guitar strum up in the middle of the keyboard and the melody up top. And that was my style. I still do it.
Yeah.
And I've had great piano players who recorded my songs phone me up and say, is this really the bass line on your piece? I said, yeah, man, it's my secret.
Yeah.
And I got a reputation for playing. So that reputation, our bands were always busy. My bands are always busy. And when I got to college, it was even worse or better, I suppose one would say. There was the Thank God It's Friday party on Friday afternoon. Oh, yeah. There was the pre-football game party at noon on Saturday. Yeah. The football game at 2. And then after 5 o'clock, they'd pick up on the evening party again, and we go till midnight.
Wow, that's a lot of playing.
A lot of playing, and I was making a fortune. I bought my own MGA sports car.
Wow.
The girls were all over the place. It was great, but I didn't have time for them. I was playing all the time, But I was formulating, I guess, a lot of a strange style that would inevitably end up with what I'm doing today, which I call, for what of a better word, classical rock. That's what I fool around with.
So you left work, decided to go with music full time. What was your first kind of?
Well, the first I don't know how big it was. The first gig was a thing of reputation. Again, I somehow I'd had this reputation among friends, or I don't know. It probably came from those dance bands at McGill. The word got out that Mills had a pretty neat band, and again, it was 2 guitars, bass and drums, and piano. And I sang at the time. I would do all the Ray Charles stuff and a lot of Animals music and House of the Rising Sun, that stuff. And the band would go on for. I remember we could change Ray Charles' "What I Say," the song "What I Say," from 3 minutes to 23 minutes. And I remember the floors would be bouncing in these old homes where the fraternities were in Montreal.
Yeah.
And the floors, I think, you guys better reinforce these floors because that song is, we're going to all end up dead, you know. But it was rock and rock. So what happened? I went into music, and I guess Kevin Hunter was a promoting guy who I'd bumped into. I was at that time going down to... I liked the group The Bells, and I had gone down to the Bonaventure Hotel where they played on Fridays and Saturday nights in Montreal. Yeah. It was a nice theater, a nice show bar that they had on the top floor of the Bonaventure. So I'd go down there and listen to them play and music. And the word got out, I guess, that I was looking for work. And about 2 months only after I jumped into the pond from the high diving board of music, Kevin Hunter phoned me and he said, "Listen, I've got these 3 gals I've just signed." He was a promoter, and he said, "I need somebody to hone their act up because I want to take them to New York City for 2 weeks and just let them play." They were very attractive girls, 3 guitars, and they sang great harmony together. And I said, "Sure, I'll do it." So I started working with them on their harmonies and how to arrange the songs that were more easily sung by them, and just general music principles. And loved it, but unfortunately, after the trip to New York, they pretty well disbanded. I think they realized they'd hit a brick wall in music too, and it was time for them to move on to other things. But what it did give me is that Kevin knew about me playing, and he knew. I think he knew he was getting a pretty good deal here. I had some good credentials, but I wasn't asking for a lot of money at the time. I'd only been in the business 2 months, so you take what you get, at that point. And the next thing I knew, Kevin phoned me, and then Cliff Edwards phoned me. And Cliff was the leader of the Bells. Kevin represented the Bells at that time in Canada. Pretty hot group. Certainly nothing like rock and roll today, but they had Manitoba Morning, Moody Manitoba Morning, which was a big song for them. And I joined them in '69, approximately 3 months after I'd gone into the business, which was 9 months quicker than I had budgeted for, which is great.
Yeah.
I was earning some pretty big money with them. And we had the big hit "Stay a While" in '71 in the spring of March '71.
So were you going into the studio or recording with them?
Absolutely. And that Cliff was great. He'd been in the studio for 2 or 3 years before I got there. Yeah. And of course, I had done some studio work even at McGill as a songwriter. There were some projects I had to do with recording, and that was all done as part of the curriculum. But working with Cliff was really the best thing for me because it got me. I was very comfortable in the studio from the day I walked in. There was never a question of me of not knowing the chart or not being able to play it, and that is all attributed to my success at McGill. And I was really pleased about the opportunities Cliff gave me to do some arranging for the group. They recorded 3 of my songs.
That's excellent.
And I suppose by the end of when Stay a While really became the monster that it did in Canada and the States in particular, I suppose by then I was beginning to feel that I'd made the right decision, that music was happening fast for me, faster than I expected. There would be 4 years of doldrums between what I'm telling you now and what went on later, but that was to be expected. And I just felt that I was, I guess, more prepared perhaps for the studio and what it implied than most of the other musicians that I had played with in school and at college.
So with the Dells, were you touring a lot with them?
Yeah, they sort of toured mostly in Canada.
Yeah.
And I realized that, I never said this to any of them, but there was a lot of movement in Canada to promote Canadians and Canadian writing and Canadian music.
Yeah.
Gordon Lightfoot said something that I thought at the time he said it was rather arrogant. He said, well, if we're good enough to play in the United States, we can compete with the Americans.
Yeah.
But if we give tariffs so that we're not quite as good, but you got to be played in the country, that's not going to help our musicianship. That's just going to get a lot of lesser quality pieces being played.
Correct. Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty harsh at the first time I heard it from Gordon. I got to know him quite well over the years, and we talked about it many times. And I realized when I was working with the Bells that there was something that wasn't quite commercially right yet with that group.
Yeah.
I can't pinpoint it. They were talented. They were good singers. I just felt that I wasn't so sure about how much further they could go.
Yeah.
To be honest, which is being harsh, but it was my reality at the time.
Yeah.
So I left them in the summer of '71 after Stay a While had become such a big hit, and went on my own. And again, things fell into place. The vice president of Polydor, Polydor Records was stationed, the head office in Montreal in Canada at the time. It's now Toronto, but in fact, I think they'd been bought out by Sony. But at the time, I became a friend of the president of the company, Everett Garrettson, who treated me like his son. He would say, "Hey, come on in, let's have a chat." He'd say, "I'll get some coffee. I'm tired of doing business, I'll talk to you about music." And then Guy Bertrand, who was vice president of the company, I'll never forget this. There was a place in Toronto, a bar called the Ports of Call, and I don't know why we were there, but Guy was there and a few of the guys from Polydor, and I was just shooting the breeze with them. And I had to go to the men's room, and when I went in there, Guy was there, and we're both doing a whittle, and he looks at me and he says, "Frank, I don't care what you've written or what you've released." He said, "I'll release it whenever it's ready." And what more confidence could you have?
Yeah.
This was a deal that I didn't even have to make. All I had to do was make music, which is what I wanted to do in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I recorded my first album. I borrowed money to do it. I hired the musicians. I hired the studio. I hired whatever I needed to do, filed the musicians' contracts, played piano and harmonica wherever I could myself, did the arranging, hired some violinists to do sort of a funky backdrop on the thing, and made my first album.
So what style would that album would have been? Where would you place that?
That's a question of all questions. Darren, you just hit the nail on the head. That was a conundrum for me.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know how I was going to fit into the pop music scene. And I decided that although I was narrow casting, and although I had a small but significant hit with a song called Love Me, Love Me, Love, I was singing it. It was originally an instrumental, but I was singing it when it became the hit.
Yeah.
I never thought of myself as a singer. I've always thought of myself as a composer or songwriter, not as a piano player.
Yeah.
There are 10 guys out there every night who can play piano better than I can, but I'm not so sure they have the ability to put on the show the way I do, or play with that funky bass and the upright that I use. They never seem to figure it out for themselves, and I did. So without sounding arrogant, it just fell into place, and I did that first album, which was a piano, and I always remember it was an 8-track, one of the first 8-track recordings done in Montreal.
Wow.
That was all new to me.
Yeah.
And, of course, the piano got 2 tracks, and then there were the various other instruments. We ended up with basically piano, guitar, bass, and drums, and 4 violinists in unison.
Oh, yeah.
That gave us sort of a Scottish, unintentionally, a Scottish feel, or a country feel even, to the melodies I was playing. And people really liked it. They perhaps I should have stayed there. Of course, in the end, Music Box Dancer allowed me to hire whatever musicians I wanted.
Exactly.
Big orchestra included, and make the music I really wanted to make. But back then on that first album, it was all new. It's all hindsight now, 40 years later, but it was new at the time.
Yeah. Exciting, probably.
Very exciting, but as Alan Thicke one day said to me later on in years when I shared a dressing room with him down in L.A., and we were chatting about the business, he said, the trouble with you and I is that we live by our wits. We never know what's going to be the next success in our lives, which was true.
Yeah.
And so I'm always dabbling with this thing. Well, now look, this piano and orchestra thing, man, that's narrow casting. You know, there'd been some great hits from Mancini, like Moon River, and some wonderful songs that I loved.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved the rock and roll side of it when I was young, but I could feel the older I was getting, I was gravitating more to bigger orchestra music, and I still was undefined as to how this was going to work itself out.
Yeah.
And always very concerned that, I got to pay for this with my mind. If these songs don't get airplay and don't sell, I've had it.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to live with. That was my biggest fear. Well, then I got married and had 3 kids, and that even accentuated the stresses, which under my neurosis that I didn't realize I had at the time was not a good thing for anybody within earshot of me. Yeah. I could be really angry at times when things weren't working well.
Yeah.
And so a temper got me into a lot of trouble, and I later had to deal with that. But fortunately, the kids still love me and call me dad, so I guess it wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
But in any event, I know they suffered a little bit from it, and so did I, because I truly was always worried about where the next dollar would come from. I had to juggle my finances all the time, try and make ends meet, as they say, despite the fact that I was touring with the Bells in Canada and the States and making, we could make $600 or $700 a week back then, just gigging and doing what we wanted to do.
Sure.
The big problem was that we never played 4 weeks in a month. We might play 3 if we're lucky.
Yeah.
So you're back down again,
Yeah.
Financially. So narrow casting was something I thought I would have to live with. And if I were going to concentrate on pop music, I would have to become sort of like a Jerry Lee Lewis without the vocals.
Exactly, yeah.
And could I pull that off?
Yeah.
And I think in hindsight, I probably did about as much with it as I could. I've never made it to the point of having endless gold records and endless wealth. But it hasn't mattered, because I've gone far enough as far as I'm concerned. I don't need any more.
Yeah.
And my questions have been answered,
So that first album finished up, and you're married, kids.
Yeah. Taxi cab driver's license.
Yeah, you did that for a while.
Yeah, I did that for a while, and then I luckily got a job at CBC in Montreal, doing a 1-hour Sunday brunch show.
Oh, wow.
Which was great. It put bread on the table every week. It was a nice weekly thing.
Yeah.
And we do 26 sections a year, and they repeat them, so you get paid for that too. And yeah, that kept me out of trouble for a few years.
So would you call this that 4-year hiatus that you were talking about earlier? Is this where we're at now?
Exactly.
Yeah. This
was the time when I had Love Me, Love Me, Love. After the within 6 months of leaving the Bells, I had a #1 hit in Canada, number 40 in the States, called Love Me, Love Me, Love. And that gets back to Gordon Lightfoot's comment that, the CRTC did promote Canadian music, and it did give a lot of people a chance, an opportunity to be heard on the radio. But by the same token, if we were going to compete in the States, our production had to be good. Yeah. Our songs had to be strong. The musicianship had to be strong. Everything had to be strong. And despite the CRTC, they were more interested in getting it played at the time. And so there was some conflict there. And in the end, I agreed with Gordon. I said, you were absolutely right about this sort of helping people and giving out money to make records and whatnot. And I said, that eventually you're down to the bottom line again of competing with the best.
Yeah.
Not to say that all the American products are the best either, or Otherworld, but musically speaking, that's where I was at. And after the instrumental album, the first one I did, had Love Me, Love Me, Love on it, which was an instrumental piece of music.
Yeah.
And Frank Gould at Polydor Records said to me, do you have lyrics for it? And I said, yeah. He said, well, sing them. I thought, sing them? I don't sing. Anyway, he stuck the record on in his office, and I sung it. And he said, I'll pay for the recording. Go down tomorrow, put the lyrics on it, and we'll release it in a month. And within 6 months, it was #1.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the end of the Easy Money.
Yeah.
The album after that one was a vocal album called Reflections of My Childhood, which, again, I paid for. And I had learned I guess a lot of my dad's business acumen had fallen on my shoulders, and I did learn how to work the commercial system and borrow money and invest it in music. And every time I borrowed money to invest in music, the bank manager would look at me and say, "This is not for music. Tell them you're moving or tell them you're doing something, but don't mention music. That's not in this office. It's not part of the deal." Okay. So again, there was still enough money. Love Me, Love Me, Love Me. It made me a lot of money. I mean, it was a gold record.
Yeah.
And it was my first real jump. After 2 years of leaving A.E. LePage, I had 2 gold records. One for Stay a While, because I was a member of the Bells. Yeah. And then the other one, because I had this song, Love Me, Love Me, Love, which went originally an instrumental that went to #1. So I wisely put some money away. In those days, you could buy annuities, and you would get a monthly check while somebody invested your money for you. Yeah. And that meant the kids could avoid craft dinner a few nights a week anyway.
So were you actually signed with Polydor at that time?
Oh, yeah. Signed with them. And the clue musically was that I realized if I were an artist, which I was with the Bells, and they were perhaps making 6 or 7% of the retail selling price, that if I funded the project and got a distribution agreement, I was making 16 to 18%.
Yeah.
So in other words, if something ever worked,
you're way better off. Yeah.
Way better off.
Yeah.
And knowing that, I virtually produced and owned all of my product until I got to the point where it didn't matter anymore, so I just let the record company own it. Yeah. And we've always settled out copyright issues, etc. about it, but they've always been pretty good to me about it. And I then found myself with that vocal album, which was a flop, frankly. It didn't go anywhere. Yeah. I knew it wouldn't. I didn't. We had a couple of hits off it, sort of hits, I guess. Poor Little Fool, the Sheila Shelley song that I recorded and sang. And I remember her calling me one day and saying, "Wow, you're getting a lot of airplay. Thanks for recording my song," you know. Yeah. And I thought, yeah, I'm getting a lot of airplay, but I should have written that song, not you. So,
yeah, I guess once you've had success writing your own music and then seeing the money come in from that and then see it go somewhere else, it makes you think twice whether you should be doing that or not.
Yeah, especially when you're so independent. Yeah. You know, there was nobody helping me at all. And I remember Alan Thicke's words, you know. Yeah. So that led me back to the instrumental albums again. And then 73, 74, I recorded the album The Poet and I.
Yes.
And on that album was The Poet and I, which was getting a lot of airplay because it was being played by a disc jockey named Paul Reed in Montreal, who had an evening show, and he would play it a lot. It's a lush sort of ballady piece. And on the B side was the 11th cut on that album, which for a long time didn't have a name. And eventually, when I was repairing my daughter's music box in the spring of 74, just before I recorded the final tracks of the album, I looked at that little dancer that I was fixing for her on a pedestal, and I thought, that's it. She's the music box dancer. Oh, yeah. And that became the name of the 11th cut that hardly got recorded because you only put 10 cuts on albums then.
Yeah.
And I went into Polydor, and I remember Frank Gould said, "What's with the 11th cut on this album?" I said, "Frank, this may sound trite, but I need the 2 cents. You know, you got 2 cents for every mechanical royalty. And every time it was stamped out, you got 2 cents.
Sure.
Which on 1,000 records doesn't add up to a lot, but on 100,000 records, you know, added up to a lot of money. So that's how it got started. And then we went to the demo thing with the 45s that were sent out whenever the record company wanted to promote something. And they were Polydor was very good about it. I'd had a significant amount of airplay and success that did carry over through the next 4 years.
Yeah.
But basically that album sat in the drawer for 4 years. The Poet and I was getting some airplay in Montreal, but that doesn't make you a fortune.
No.
Love Me, Love Me, Love was over with, and Music Box Dancer was being played a lot, but not enough to create any real interest on the part of the recording company.
So tell the story how that song came about to getting played, because it was on the B side.
Exactly. Yeah. I had met Dave Watts with whom I'm still very friendly with. He's a nice man, good guy, my age. We have a lot of fun together. And Dave was the probably the top rock jock at CFRA Radio in Ottawa, which was a big station, very powerful in Canada.
Yeah.
It had the whole government behind it in the sense that, you know, it was an adult station, really, adult rock, but it was more adult than teens, as opposed to some of the other stations in the country, like Toronto and whatnot.
Sure.
And Dave had come to many Bells concerts because we were selling records and they were playing them.
Yeah.
And I got to know Dave quite well. We'd have a few beers at the Talisman Bar, and which was this very strange hotel and restaurant that modeled itself after some hotel in the Philippines or in Thailand or something, with the grass skirts and the whole bit. Anyway, we'd had a few beers there. And when Music Box and The Poet and I were released on a single, based solely on airplay, The Poet and I was getting more play than anyone else, and Music Box Dancer was getting the second amount, all for different reasons. And Frank Gould said to me, "I'd like to release this, Bo." He said, "I don't know, The Poet and I," he said, it's a wild card. He said, "It might work, it might not." And then he said, "Well, the B-side, I like the B-side," he said, "but let's go with the math on the thing and the projections." And so it was released as a single with The Poet and I on the A-side, this lush, milky ballad, versus this poppy little funky tinkly piano piece on the B-side. And Dave Watts gets the copy of it in Ottawa when it was mailed out to all the radio stations. And he phones me and he said, "I've got some interesting news for you." He said, I looked at your promo. These were 45s at the time with the big center, you know.
Yeah.
And he said, "I looked at your promo release here." And he said, "I played The Poet and I." He said, "We can't play that. We're an adult rock station." And he said, "I just can't play it. It's too slow and dreamy, and it's not get up and have fun today music." And I said, "I agree. I was never disillusioned about my product. I knew enough about the business to know that he couldn't play it, and he had every good reason not to."
Yeah.
And not for me to browbeat him to play it. I just said, that's fine, you know. And
Sure.
he said, "Well, the good news is I played the B-side for the fun of it, and I haven't been able to make a phone call for 2 hours because the switchboard's been jammed.
Wow.
Everybody wants to know what this crazy little piano piece is."
Yeah.
And he said, "I've never seen anything like it in my career." And in those days, you know, the big deal was getting you charted. Oh, if you're charted, you're on the way to a hit, you know, or at least how far you're going to go. And he said, "I'm not even going to list it at 100. He said, "I'll list it at 90 with a bullet if you can get some records up here soon." Yeah. And I said, "Okay, what soon?" This was a Thursday, I think. I phoned the guy at the taxi cab office and said, "Forget it, you're not going to see me anymore." And I drove up to Ottawa on the Monday. Trying to get some records made from Polydor was difficult at that time because the guy in charge of the company was in Germany, which is where they were head officed.
Sure.
And the next guy in command was on vacation. And luckily, Dieter Radecki at the time was one of the lesser executives of the company. But he said, "We've always been good friends." And he said, "I'm going to do this for you." He said, "I'll shut down the presses. We'll pump out 1,000 copies for you. You could take them to Ottawa Monday morning," which I did. And the rest was really history. It went from 90 with a bullet to 80 to 70 to 60, and it finally #1. And it sat there for 2 or 3 weeks until it got bounced off by the Doobie Brothers with "What a Fool Believes." You know, great song. Yeah.
So obviously it started to get picked up by, you know, because Ottawa.
It only took the one.
Yeah.
And then the rest of them had to get on it because rumors spread, you know, and they do. And the business is such that it's the expression today is going viral, but that is also being abused today. You know, is this really viral? Is this viral in Saskatoon?
Exactly.
There's a big difference of being viral in Toronto and viral in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
Not to be, insulting in any way whatsoever. It's just hard economic fact. So,
how long did it take to really spread across?
Not long. I was surprised. The Americans didn't pick up. Oh, this was in 1978 in Canada. It really, in the late fall, was #1 just about everywhere.
Yeah.
And a guy again at Polygram Records, a fellow I befriended and still talk to now and then, Mike Hoppy, he said, "Hey, listen, the vice president of Polydor US, which was Deutsche Grammophon at the time, is going to be in Toronto." And he said, got a little bar that we could go and have supper with him. And he said, I want you to, he said, the piano is surrounded by plants. And he said, I want you to leave the table and go and start playing Music Box Dancer.
Yeah.
And he said, I know he's going to get on it right away. And I was playing and no sign of this guy. And then all of a sudden, the bulrushes parted, and the president of Deutsche Grammophon US walks through and says, I love it. We'll distribute it. We'll sell it tomorrow. Give it to me. Give it to Canada. He couldn't wait. Awesome. And the next thing was, he said, I probably won't pay you very much for the singles, but you're going to get a gold album anyway. Yeah. And that's how it went. He knew right away it was a smash.
Wow.
So that scenario basically happened in 26 other countries.
And incredible being an instrumental. I mean, on top of that, it was an instrumental.
Yeah, so. And 4 hours later, 4 years later than the recording.
Yeah.
You know, it was spooky the way it all happened. It just had to happen.
Yeah.
But if you remember, the disco era ended around 78.
Mm-hmm.
People were tired of thumping music just to dance to, which disco was. It was great, you know, nothing better than Saturday Night Fever, in my opinion. But the audience was ready for something different.
Sure.
And piano, well, it's come and it's gone, and it's come and it's gone over the years. And when I travel out west here in particular, it's always, certainly here in Alberta, there are a lot of piano players. Winters are long here.
Yeah.
So people in the western provinces in general tend to play a lot of piano.
Yeah.
It's still strong. The instrument itself, now it's gone full bore. I had an electronic piano that I traveled with for 12 years, and nobody knew the difference.
No.
And in fact, I had a concert grand shell made that we put the synthesizer into and use that. You could take it anywhere, take it on the plane, you know.
Yeah.
Set it up in the barnyard and play. It was great.
Yeah.
So now we're renting pianos because nobody keeps them in concert halls anymore because nobody uses them.
Exactly.
So I'm a dying breed, I guess.
The outside of, obviously, it became big in the U.S. and Canada. Do you remember what the next big country that picked up on the song was?
Definitely Japan.
Yeah.
And they went crazy. When you stop and think about it, the Japanese love little tinkly stuff. You know, they churn out music boxes by the millions, and their cars are all very high-techy and have the latest in electronics and whatever. And that they are very good at that. They're very good at doing that.
So is that obviously part of Polydor and their worldwide distribution?
It was Polydor KK. All the Polydor companies were offered these songs, and if they weren't, that album, I should say, and if they didn't pick up on it, then they went to EMI or somebody else.
Yeah.
Because my contract was contingent upon them releasing it in Canada and the United States, and if it didn't get released in the States, the contract ended.
Yeah.
So they were under some pressure too.
So how soon did you start performing? I mean, obviously that song became big and people wanted to see you. How soon were you starting to do shows after that? Was it pretty quick?
Really quick. In 78, again, Dave Watts phoned me that summer when Music Box was a hit in Ottawa and spreading rapidly across Canada until the end of 78 when it hit the States in 79. But I never forget, it was the summer of 78, and Dave phoned me and he said, you know, the station's put a lot of effort into your music. And I said, Dave, you've done everything you possibly could. It was a very... I don't know, I just felt so indebted to those people. Yeah. Again, I've run into people who go out of their way to help me. I don't know, perhaps I have that aura about me that I need help. But anyway, and that's not wrong. That particular scene was so funny because he said, well, Pepsi would like you to come to Ottawa. They're going to sponsor a little concert because this song of yours is not only hitting the pop people, it's getting children, piano players, and they just want to have a little party for you at Moody's Bay. And would you play a few songs? We'll get a piano. They're going to buy they'll distribute the Pepsi to everybody free and hot dogs free. But he said, you know, would you play for 10 or 12 songs? I said, sure, it'd be a delight.
Yeah.
So sure enough, I'm living in Montreal at the time, and I'm on my way to do the concert at 2 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon. I think it was July. And a Saturday afternoon, and I get stuck in this traffic jam going to Moody's Bay, which I'd never been to in my life before. and it's just not moving. And I'm supposed to be there at 2, and I'm bogged down in traffic, and it's about 15 minutes to 2, and it's just not going anywhere. And it was so funny the way it happened. I rolled down my window. The guy next to me looked like he was okay, So I said to him, "Excuse me, sir, but is the traffic always like this here? Because I'm hoping to get to Moody's Bay soon." And he said, No, the traffic's never like this. There's some guy named Frank Mills who's playing up at Moody's Bay at 2 o'clock. So there I was, stuck in my own traffic jam. What could be better? Yeah. And nobody knew it.
So I guess would have been somewhat difficult in a way. Here you had your first big, huge number one hit. Well, you've had a couple before.
Well, that's it.
But that was the big one.
Yeah.
And then you had to go out and do shows. I guess the tough thing was, what else do you do to, especially when you have one, I think anyone has this issue when you have, that monster big hit and you haven't had 20 hits before it. People want to come see you. How do you fill a whole concert? Like, what do you do? I mean, that's probably was a lot of thought to put into that.
It wasn't the thought, it was the trepidation that killed me. What am I going to do? I said to Dave, "What do you want me to do? Play Music Box 10 times?" Because I wasn't ready for it. Yeah. I had performed before, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
So getting out on a stage was not the issue. And I had done that enough to be confident about that. The issue was, what repertoire am I going to play?
Yeah.
And I decided the best thing to do would be to put in some songs that everybody knew. So sure. I played Heartbreak Hotel, and I played Bye Bye Love, and I played a lot of the hits, and then Music Box Dancer, and then I'd play a few more hits, and then Music Box Dancer. And they went crazy. They expected 500 people at Moody's Bay, and 5,000 showed up.
Wow.
They ran out of Pepsi, ran out of hot dogs, ran out of everything, and I was still there, I think, at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, playing away happily, and everybody had a great time. Yeah,
that's fabulous. It must have felt amazing when that show was done.
I think it proved a lot of things and answered a lot of questions. And I've always been very analytical about what I'm doing. And, am I on the right track here? Because you're only as strong as your latest hit. It's a scary place to be. And I made my mistakes in predicting it. I suppose I might be getting a little better now that there have been so many albums, so many songs. But even then, when I play a song in concert, and particularly what we're doing in our concerts these days, which is playing along with the full orchestra, I sort of wonder, are people going to like this? They're used to the piano almost alone with the 4 violinists. That was what my pop background was, and even the whole orchestral arranging for the album on which Music Box Dancer was, called The Poet and I, was basically that instrumentation. Yeah. I added a chorus to beef it up a bit, and in some places I added cellos and violas for the underlinings of the string section, primarily because I could afford to do so. Yeah. I couldn't before. But I'm still back at simple piano, and I sort of wonder, maybe that's where I should have stayed. Maybe I should have just churned out song after song after song with those arrangements, but that's not really what I was in music for. No, I was in it to see how far I could take it and what could I do to make what I thought would be better. And it was a partial goal of mine was starting to come out here. There's some direction was starting to gel. Yeah, the best way of putting it. And now we're about 1980 at this time, and I'm thinking, what do I really want to do? And it was sort of, I'd love to get people more interested in orchestral music by playing pop music with the orchestra.
Sure.
That was a part of it.
So you're probably one of the pioneers of doing that, because that's how kind of orchestras are surviving now. They're doing pop series, and that's what's keeping the money rolling in.
Absolutely, and I must have done 100 of those concerts after at Music Box, all gratis. I did it because I wanted to. They were all trying to raise money, and nothing was better than invite me, then pack the hall, make a fortune, and I'd move on, which was fine. I wasn't getting paid for it, but I was happy to see classical music, in a sense, classical orchestra, being promoted.
So you started also touring really all over the world.
Absolutely, yeah. 1980 was my first invitation to Japan after doing a television tour of the United States.
Yeah.
With there again, we were forced into doing TV because this was all happening so fast. It was the only medium available to me to cover the United States in a month or two.
Sure.
You can't do it in concert unless you're doing 5 concerts a day, and that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's what I found myself touring Japan and touring the world, and still thinking about where am I going with this? You know, what's going to happen? Where should I go with this? And so those questions, I think your question is very astute. It was a conundrum for me for a long time. And all because of what Alan Thicke said, we live by our wits. And that next song, do they like it or not?
Sure.
And I remember playing the first. There were 2 major influences on me with regard to orchestra and pop writing. And the 2 strongest influences at all were, I remember doing a TV show with Mason Williams, who wrote A Classical Gas, which was the guy beat me. You know, this guy heard it the first time, and I thought, damn it, I've been licked at my own game. He's got this piece out. It's a hit. It's a wonderful piece of music.
Yeah.
I was so jealous and envious because I later met Mason, and we talked a lot about it. And I wrote a song called The Classical Rock, which I sent to him to say, you know, thanks for your hints, and this is the result of our conversation.
Yeah.
But that said, I just loved that piece of Classical Gas. And but there were actually 2 bigger influences, I suppose. I remember driving across a bridge, which is very narrow, to get to my apartment on the north side of Montreal. And I heard Richard Harris did an album with Jimmy Webb called A Tramp Shining. And his hit out of that was a song called MacArthur Park. And it has harpsichord in it and a lot of orchestra. Jimmy was a master at recording and arranging for orchestra. And I thought, gosh, this is so close to what I want to do also, you know. And I remember pulling over this 1-lane, well, 2-lane bridge, but going each way. I pulled over on my lane and stopped the car. The horn started honking, and I'm listening to Jimmy Webb, Richard Harris singing, you know, that song, MacArthur Park. And I realized I was blocking the traffic. And so I crossed the bridge and pulled over on the other side until it finished, because it's quite a long song. The other influence on me was really when Paul Buckmaster did the arrangements for Elton John's first album.
Oh, yeah.
With your song on it. But more important, there's a song called 60 Years On. And the string chart on it is so Stravinsky-like.
Yeah.
You know, it's just beautiful string writing. That was another one that I thought, oh my God, if I could write strings like that. But then I met Jim Peary in Canada, who could write strings like that. And I worked with Jim for 20 years, I guess, before he passed away about 6-7 years ago. And he did some great arranging for me and allowed my dreams of classically oriented pop rock music and the orchestra to come to fruit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So obviously, Music Box Dancer is still, you know, a huge song, but it would have peaked at some point and probably felt like it, you know, you need to go on to what's my next thing and what I need to do next to kind of come up with another Music Box Dancer. What was your thought of where to go from there?
The first thing I learned was that I couldn't come up with another Music Box Dancer. It was too big.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in instrumental music. And it wouldn't happen. It ranks in one of the top 10 instrumental pieces ever played, ever written.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm very happy about that. Yeah. But as you said, it peaks. And now it's fallen off its peak, but it's sort of at a comfort. It's on a plateau now.
Yeah,
that doesn't change.
No,
the world loves it. New piano players are coming up. New kids are being born every day, and they are my audience.
Sure.
And that has plateaued, so it's pretty well reached a consistent level stage now.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the royalties are welcomed, but on the other hand, that's never been a big deal for me. I think making the money side of the music was really part of my plan to allow me to do better with it. I spent it on orchestras, and I spent it on recordings, and I spent it on demos. I started doing demos of different approaches. I had always liked Roberto Delgado, who was recorder for Deutsche Grammophon, his instrumental pieces. James Last and his orchestra were churning them out in Germany. 500 million songs, he sold 500 billion records he sold.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, can I do this? So I went up to Ottawa and recorded some demos in a style that he was using, the orchestra and chorus, lead singers. That didn't work. It just was not where I wanted to go. And so I ended up doing my own thing, which in reality was continuing to write piano-oriented pieces accompanied by some large orchestration, and usually with a pop beat somewhere in it.
Sure.
And that has posed a problem, because I think I've written a lot of quite attractive piano melodies that don't get played because there's the rhythm section behind it.
Oh, yeah.
If that weren't there, they'd be playing it on classical stations.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened. So I was thinking of mixing them again without the rhythm section and putting out an album. Maybe they'd play it, maybe they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But it's all conjecture.
So obviously, you must have done a lot of TV work with a song that large.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned you were in the States doing a lot of TV press and that.
Yeah.
What were some of the highlights for you there?
Oh, I remember doing the Merv Griffin show, the Dinah Shore show, a lot of big names I met. I had my own TV specials with CBC here in Canada and ATV down east.
Yeah.
And what's the other one? Not CBC, but the opposing group in Toronto.
CTV?
CTV, did a lot of work with them. And it was all great. It was all fun. But I hated television.
Oh, yeah.
I had a dreadful fight with my weight until I was about 60. And a doctor I met introduced me to sugar. And she claimed that my ailment was caused by the inability of my body to process sugar. All sugar does for me is puts the pounds on.
Oh, yeah.
And she convinced me to do something about it when she told me she thought I had diabetes. And I told her I thought she was crazy. But she said, do one thing for me. Just get off sugar for a month and see how you feel.
Sure.
I did that, promptly lost 12 pounds, felt like $1 million, had more energy than I've ever had in my life. I'm not saying this is something for everyone, but she claims that about 1 out of 3 people have this dreadful accelerator process brought on by eating too much sugar.
Yeah.
And in my case, it has happened. My weight has no longer been an issue. I fluctuate from 2 to 3 pounds up or down on either side of 205. And that's where I've been for 10 years now.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that it makes a difference for everybody, I think.
Well, and when I walk out on a TV show now, I feel confident, instead of being slobby at one time and at other times miserable because I'm on a diet. Diets do not do well with me.
Yeah.
They make me another guy. Again, that other guy comes out,
So you just really didn't like TV because you thought you looked too big on TV?
I just didn't think I looked like I should have looked.
Yeah.
I could have looked a lot better.
Yeah.
I thought if you can lose 20 pounds, you'll feel happy about being on TV.
Yeah.
But it caused serious emotional conflicts within me.
Yeah.
And I had to get over it. And now at the point where I'm not on TV anymore, but I'm perfect in weight, and it's a sad situation, but that's the way the cookie crumbled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're obviously out here on tour, on a tour that Brian Edwards is promoting, and I know you've been working together with Brian a long time. How did that all come about? You and Brian kind of hooking up and started working together.
Well, I think you mentioned earlier about the business about performing. Now, all of a sudden, I had to perform. I was scared stiff of it for, I would say, 5 years.
Yeah.
And since Music Box happened in 78 in Canada, it would probably be 81, 82 before I felt comfortable walking out doing one of the favorite dates I loved always was doing that down on the harbor front in Toronto with the Toronto Symphony.
Sure.
And I played there several times every summer for probably 4 or 5 years. And that got me a little bit more used to playing in public. And then one day I sat down with myself and I said, look here, you've got to start enjoying this, because if you don't, your career's going to suffer from it. And there was a point where I had thought, I have a decent sense of humor. I'm basically a good guy, I think. I like people. So you got to go out there thinking, let it happen. Let it just be yourself and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it's funny, all the groups I see today that are doing well are doing exactly that. They're being themselves. There's nothing presumptuous about them. And the ones who are presumptuous are no longer.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I eventually just talked myself into saying, look, you got to walk out there and do it. So you might as well have fun. Don't let it be such an issue. And by doing so, I gradually reached the stage probably 20 years ago. There isn't much that throws me. I could walk out and do a concert for the Queen, and she's just another person as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it. I've had, Pierre Elliott Trudeau heard me play several occasions at the Juno Awards, and that's Justin Trudeau's father. And I got to know him a little bit, which was a pleasure. And I thought, I've got to meet these people at their level. And it was a lack of confidence, I think, that played part of it, but and maturity. But I realized that I could put on a decent show after a while. And having done it now for so many years, it's fun.
Yeah.
The audiences have dwindled somewhat. I'm not packing the houses like they used to be. But on the other hand, I see people in the lineup after the concert where I sign autographs, and they come up to me and say, this is my 7th concert seeing you.
Wow.
And this might be in Saskatoon or anywhere in Canada.
Yeah.
Or I've been 10 times. Or I drove from Nunavut on my snowmobile 300 miles to see your concert. And I'm saying, these people aren't fooling. They're very dedicated people. So I'm going to give them what they expect.
Exactly. Yeah.
And whether the audiences are as huge as they used to be or not, the nice thing is that when I walk out on stage, they're friends. I've known them for years.
Yeah.
Not personally, but they've loved my music for years. I still get emails from all of them.
Yeah.
I get many emails from all over the world, which I answer personally. And the career really, in hindsight, I look at it and say, I've gone about as far as I wanted to go.
Yeah.
I've pushed it, I think, as far as I could. Perhaps, as I said to, I think it's Peter Zosky, who had a great show in Toronto, and it was a great interview, and he said to me one day, what percentage are you business and what percentage are you music? And I thought that was an amazing question for him to ask, because I had become very much aware that my music talent was not at the level of Glenn Gould, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, my favorite of all, Eric Clapton.
Yeah.
And I had to settle for the fact that perhaps I was maybe 40% music, business and 60% music. And unlike them, who had managers looking after their finances and all the rest of it, unlike those people who are 90%, 95% showbiz,
Yeah.
and great writers, etc., I've had to look back on it and frankly say I've really accomplished everything I set out to do. I don't need anything else.
Yeah.
My life is very full, and to be able to connect with those people who, after all these years, are diehard fans and come out to see me, what more can you ask for? I don't think there's much more.
No, it's fantastic, especially if you can get to that point where you just feel, yeah, I've done what I've wanted, and you're super comfortable. And I think you get to a point where you stop chasing the dream or whatever you want to call it, right? And you get, I'm not sure if that's an age thing or just a maturity thing, or it's a point of your career, or you just get to a point where it's like, I just like making music, and I like that people love what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And you have nothing to prove besides just making these people happy, and it's a great place to be.
There were stages
Yeah.
that, my first retirement took place in 2000, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And I wrestled with it. And what had happened was that I had toured with my band for 12 years.
Yeah.
Just the 5 of us, great musicians, all great people too. And I toured with them, and I thought, if nothing changes, I have to quit. And I didn't know how to change it. I thought we were at an apex.
Yeah.
We were selling out houses still. We were having a lot of fun at what we were doing. And I didn't know what direction it would change, nor did I know how to do it.
Yeah.
So I retired. I didn't retire from songwriting at the time. I retired from showbiz.
Sure.
And performing. Well, 10 years later, we get into stage 2 of retirement.
Yeah.
And Brian Edwards phones and says, hey, do you want to go out with Rita McNeil? And I thought, wow, Rita, you know, audience is over 50, mature, pretty clean-cut show. Just about everything I was doing when I retired. And I said to Brian, let's go. Yeah. So that was the first retirement of the retirement tour, I call them. And there have been 8 since and 2 1 year. So this is the 9th retirement tour for touring as far as the show goes.
Yeah.
Well, toured with Rita for about 5 years, off and on. And I wrote 2 songs she liked, recorded both of them. Somewhere a Child is Sleeping, which had been written long before I knew Rita. She liked it, she recorded it. And then I wrote a song especially for her called Whatever Happened to Christmas. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a poke on, you know, there's no Santa Claus at the mall anymore, and Christmas trees don't exist anymore, and Jesus has all but disappeared. And it's a funny song, really, and it wasn't meant to be serious, which it isn't. And she turned it into almost a New Orleans funky blues piece, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe this is the time to stop songwriting. You know, this was great. And so I did. I didn't write a song for 3 or 4 years. And then, of course, the song about In Flanders Fields came about, and that was the end of my composition retirement.
Yeah.
And that was another stage. And what was happening here was that the question that I couldn't answer back in 2000 when I retired was, how do I change this? Changed by fate. By working with Rita, brought me back out on the scene again with a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
I was alone. I was doing my own thing.
So during that 10 years of not doing live shows, were there times that you wanted to get out, or you were fine writing and enjoying life? And
I was fine writing. I mean, originally, if I'd had my druthers, I always thought I just wanted to be in the studio, write songs, and get people to sing them.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's a shame I didn't do that. That might have, over the years, produced perhaps more interesting songs for the public than my narrow casting with the piano turned out, but it wasn't to be. I guess either my heart wasn't in it, or I got involved with these other projects.
Yeah.
So
I always think, you know, I look back at, I can only kind of relate to what I've been through, and there was a time that I spent a lot of time in the studio.
Sure. And
produced a lot of projects, and it was super creative.
Sure.
And when I was in high school, that's what I wanted to do.
Sure.
Little kid going into with my family group when I was 7 into the studio, and just was mesmerized by being in the studio. And,
absolutely.
And you know, everything that had to do with it. And then for me, I think I got burnt out. I was just doing too much of it.
Yep.
And I stepped away, similar to how you stepped away from doing the live shows. And now to this day, there's a big part of me that really thinks, what if I kept with that, you know?
Sure.
Because I like doing live, I like performing, I like going out and doing the technical end of things. But there's something about the studio and creating music that is different, and it's because some of it's just you, right? It's not, you're not there to please a bunch of people. There's not that worry, right? And that's enjoyable. But there's something about just being on your own, creating. I guess it's like painting or anything that's creative in that end of things. There's something special about that, and for me, I know I miss doing that. I mean, I get back in every once in a while, but you need time. You really,
Absolutely.
you just can't just dibble dabble in it.
No.
You need lots of time to really settle
Oh,
in.
yeah.
And
It's a commitment.
Get yourself in that mode. And, I think eventually I'll probably get myself back there again. But, I understand, where you're coming from, because, getting back to just writing, and that's really what your true, probably what you figure your true self, going back to McGill and going through learning how to write and produce and all that. That's basically the heart of who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've always felt that the writer is where creativity begins.
Sure.
It's where thought becomes words.
Yeah.
Written words. So books, poetry, music, etc., plays, all the great art forms that we're with today rely upon the writer. It starts with the writer.
Yeah.
And that's why we're probably very well paid as writers. But it's a very scary occupation.
Sure.
You know, you're only as hot as your next hit, as they used to say to me in the record business.
And it's almost out of your control. Like when you're performing live, at least you're in charge of producing the show. It's whether people leave being satisfied and happy, that's all up to you.
Yeah.
And you can write great songs, but after that's done, it's kind of out of your hands. It's got to get to the right person. They got to do the right job with it. The record company's got to promote it correctly. All those things have to be, done correctly, and it's all out of your hands.
All the pieces have to fall
in
the right hole. It's like playing a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
I call it musical Sudoku. You've got to fit all those parts in together. As I've gotten, I'm not overly religious, and haven't been since I left as a choir boy in church when I was about 16 years of age. But I've come very strongly to believe in another power, or at least the path. There is something there that I think we have to stay on our path. Otherwise, we get into trouble.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not overly religious, but I certainly believe there's something else to this life, because so many things have fallen into place, particularly with lest we forget where poppies grow, which is, I find, very spooky. It's all the things that happened in it, and that brought me out of retirement of songwriting after 4 years.
So let's talk about that. You had a lady from Fredericton, New Brunswick, come see the show. Was that when we were out on tour last year?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So she wrote to you, and maybe fill in that rest of that story.
It was the evening of November 6th. We played in that lovely little playhouse in Fredericton.
Yeah.
One of my favorite theaters. It's been one of my favorite audiences. We don't sell out all the time, but we've got a very strong following there.
Yeah.
And on November the 6th, she attended the concert. I didn't know her. I didn't meet her. I got an email probably after Remembrance Day, probably around the 1st of December. I got an email from her. And I was reading it, and it said, I was at the concert. I'm sorry I couldn't meet you. I'm a nurse, and I was on duty that night, and I had to leave instantly after the concert to get to the hospital to work. But she said the family had always been in the Canadian military, and one of her favorite poems was In Flanders Fields, written by John McCrae, and a doctor. And she said, there's a lot of music written to the poem. And she said, I couldn't help but feel while I was listening to you talk about composition of music and listening to your very simple melodies that seem so strong, that perhaps you would try writing new music to the poem In Flanders Fields. Mm-hmm. That was it. And I thought, wow, this is... First of all, it was a great compliment, because she would put me in the same realm as Dr. McCrae and this famous poet and this poem that is universal. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. This is getting a little bit beyond my maybe. And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, let's see what he's all about. So I started Googling Dr. McCrae and found out there were some very strange coincidences that he and I shared. The first one was that he had been educated at McGill University Medical School, where I went into. Wow. He passed, I failed. But then I went into music. he was also on duty in the hospital as a practicing physician in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal, where my father passed away about 40 years later. And he was also a practicing physician for 8 years. This wasn't just a passing fancy, at the University of Vermont Medical Hospital, where my doctor is and where I go for treatment now because we live in Vermont.
Yeah.
And then I got over that one and I started looking at the poem closely, In Flanders Fields. It's written in a rondo style, which is very complex. The first verse, I believe, has 7 lines to it. The second verse has 5 and the third has 9. And it's sort of a very challenging form to write poetry to. Mm-hmm. It's not A, B, A, B, A, B. It's A, B, C. And then it changes because each verse is different from the first one.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I noticed. And I thought, well, how do I put that into music with these changes? And then the second thing I thought, the lyric in the third verse, among other things, says, "The torch be yours to hold it high." And I thought, where have I seen that before? This is pretty strong stuff now. I'm starting to get a little tingling in the back of my neck. And I realized that those lines were the last lines I uttered in my high school years in 1959 when I gave my valedictory speech.
Wow.
I was the valedictorian then in 1959 at Mount Royal High School. And the high school motto was the torch, and then it was in Latin, tuum tollere in altum, be yours to hold it high. And I thought, wow, somebody's telling me something. I think I better write this anyway, even if it's just because, for whatever reason, there's too much coincidence here. And I automatically admired Dr. McCrae so much because of the way his life and my life had crossed.
Sure. Yeah.
I find the human situation fascinating because we've only been on the planet for the twinkling of an eye in terms of evolution and the planet's life itself. And I'm thinking, this is coincidental. McCrae died in 1918 of pneumonia, not of the war. This song, if I were going to produce it, was going to come out in 2018, which is the 100th anniversary of the end of the First War.
Yeah.
And it just goes on and on. And so all of that being considered, I really put an effort into writing it. And 3 days later, sometime in mid-December, I think it was, I came up with the solution to the rondo form musically. Mm-hmm. And it was to take whatever lines he had used to rhyme and simply write new music to the lines that he'd added on.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, there's 7 in the first verse, 5 in the second, and 9 in the third, which means they're each in common. The first verse, 5, is also in the second verse, but it's 5, but it's actually 7 in the first verse, and then 9, so it has 5, but 4 more. Yeah. And so I just added on those extra lines, and I sneakily repeated the last line of the last verse. Mm-hmm. So that meant that I only had to come up with 2 new lines to solve that problem, because I repeated the last one.
Sure.
So there we are with a complex mathematical situation. A lady who's suggested that I write music to a poem that I'm beginning to think is way above my talent. It's an honor. Her grandfather was operated on by John McCrae in 1915 in the war, on the battlefield. Took shrapnel out of his knees. And so I felt an obligation to Joanne and her family to do this. The biggest motive, however, for doing that song was really that I realized I'm now 76 years of age, and I had more or less forgotten about the First World War. Mm-hmm. Not forgotten it, it's still there by poppies, on Poppy Day. But really, we should be more conscientious about it. We're very conscientious about recent war.
Sure.
Perhaps even the Second World War, which ended in 1945. But during which I was born. But I really felt a close relationship with Dr. McCrae, despite the 100 years difference between us. Of course, I was born in 42. He died in 18, so we didn't have that far apart to go on. But I was really convinced that if I'm going to do this, it has to be done in the spirit of the poem. It's not what I want to do with it. I've got to hold on to that wonderful spirit he evokes of passing the torch from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
And as such, I prayed, I've done, and people seem to think they love it, and that's great. It's doing very well as a song. My ambition, I guess, is to have it played perhaps on Armistice Day in Ottawa at some time, which probably will be, but I don't know.
So you went into the studio and got it.
July 11th.
Yeah.
And the funny thing happened was that I came up with this melody, and I recorded. I have a funny little synthesizer up down in Nassau, which I use to just fiddle around on when I'm down there. If it's raining or something and I can't go out, which is very seldom, I'll go up and play a few tunes or just put the earphones on and play away and come up with a new melody or something. That's just part of the gig. And I did that, and I thought, this thing is intriguing. As it happened, my dear friend Hayward Parrott, who I'd done recordings with now for over 30 years, was coming down with his wife to spend some time in one of the big hotels for whom she works. I think it's Hilton. Anyway, they came down to spend a few days in the new Bahamar Hotel in the Bahamas as a guest of the company and to make some comments, I guess. And while they were there, I suggested when they're done to come and spend a few days with us because we're such close friends and we get along well. And they did that. And I told them, I said, I've got something I want you to hear. I'm curious about your opinion about it.
Yeah.
So I played the track and read the poem to them. Well, they're both in tears when it ended. And I thought, is this good or is this bad, But it was obviously so emotional, which is what I was trying to catch.
Sure.
Because the poem is so emotional. And Hayward said, it's beautiful. We have to record it, and I want to produce it. Well, there was another thing that had gone on in my life. I always believe in hiring people who can do a job better than I can. Mm-hmm. Hence, I'd never had problem hiring violinists because I couldn't play a violin if I had to. And Hayward was the producer I've always been looking for. I've produced a lot of albums in my life, but I guess it had been since Rita, maybe 5 or 6 years since I'd recorded.
Yeah.
And here was the guy saying, I love it, I want to record it, let me produce it, please. I said, Hayward, run with it, because I'm getting too old for this stuff. So all I did really was write the song. Yeah. And in concert, I'd play live piano against, as you know, a -1 track. And it seems to go over well, and I enjoy playing it. But really, the only thing I did about that song was write it.
It's a great song. I think, make sure that everyone listening is, try to find that. It's probably, is it on your website? Or is it, what's the...
If it isn't, it should be very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it will be a download soon. I don't know how that works either, but Universal are going to release it.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and you can see the reaction when you do it live, and people really gravitate. And I think it's a song that doesn't have to be just played, in November, right? Or it can be. Yeah. It's a song year round for sure, because you can take a lot from it, and I think everyone who listens to it, there's something there for everybody, and that everyone's going to have a different feeling on it. It's certainly a song that pulls the heartstrings. So really well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The poem, of course, elicits an emotion that's worldwide. It's universal.
Yeah.
The pain of war. And that's what we forget, I think. Nobody likes war. And if I added to the rejuvenation of that spirit for all wars by allowing music to be the basis for popularity, which I hope it will, then I've accomplished everything I wanted to do with it.
Yeah. So from here on, where do you see Frank Mills in next 5 years from now? Is it you kicking back, enjoying life a lot? I know that. And
I've always enjoyed life.
And obviously, if touring is still happening and coming out of retirement every once in a while, and I can tell from these last few shows that I've been at, you zip over to the merch table during intermission, and people are very passionate about seeing you, and the fans coming to the shows are they're just taking this lady in front of me last night. She could not stop bouncing her head back and forth. She was engaged in every single story, and which is neat about the crowds. There's everybody there. As you know, there were 4-year-olds there last night. There was 10-year-olds. There were 30-year-olds, and there were 80-year-olds, and it's pretty neat. Must be for you especially to see that wide range and the generations of people coming out. And I saw at the very end, it was packing up, and there was a grandmother, a mom, and a granddaughter all there. They all came together.
Sure.
And that was really cool. That must feel really great.
It does. I mean, narrow casting as it has been, if that's the right word, the audience has transcended all ages. Doesn't seem to be a factor. And something interesting about the latest CD, which is really a compilation of songs that I wrote that were recorded by different people, all at my request, actually. And the comment about that too is that, gosh, I haven't heard that song before, but it's so typically Frank Mills. I really enjoy it. There are a lot of pieces on that album that people have not heard before, because they were parts of different albums and different projects. But that bond of so many young people and selling piano books, which have 63 of my pieces in them. Probably there could be 220 pieces for piano that I've written, another 300 or 400 that I threw in the garbage, but 63-piece songbook still is one of our best sellers. Yeah. And that's a hell of a compliment to me. I sit back and laugh about it. I mean, these tours are not getting any easier. Air travel is not getting easier. You wait longer and you fly less. But that's all part of the game. Pianos are getting scarce now. We have to find them now.
And it's really hard to find good pianos. Yeah. It's hit and miss. You might have one in a tour that's stellar, and the rest are just they just don't have the need for them anymore. They just don't keep them up, or it's sad. And there's obviously so many people just coming with their electric piano and touring that way. I guess that's always a possibility, but when you're flying and when you're on a big tour, that's you can do that and carry your shell like you used to do.
Exactly.
But that's it's a harder. But when you get a great piano like we did the other night in Medicine Hat,
right?
It really is something, and I think probably this really makes you as a player just give that much more, because it's not on, you're enjoying the instrument so much, it's not on your mind going, oh, okay, this is tough to get through.
Hard work. Yeah. Well, there are two types of pianos. There are happy pianos and they're not happy pianos. And they're all a varying degree of both. And I don't know what it is that when I find a piano that just sings, it's like finding a human. It's like hearing a new voice on the air. This gal can really sing, know. I always remember thinking, Lady Gaga, what a dumb name that is for a person who can sing so well, which she does. She's a great singer. And that surprised me. But likewise, it just it surprises me that we're where we were at, I guess, in touring, and that the audiences are so strong, and that the show is so strong, and that my songs are so much appreciated by people. That's where it's all at.
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah. Well, we'll wrap this up. I know we're probably both getting, it's Thanksgiving Monday, and we're going to try to find some turkey.
Try and find a turkey in Alberta. Yeah. Exactly. I think we get a better chance of finding a cow. But
Well, this has been great. I just want to say, the last few years, been able to work with you and doing some of these tours have been a real pleasure. and as much fun as it is being able to see the show night after night, I enjoy the rides to the next gig as much as anything, because the stories and hearing about your life and the different things you talk about, and you have wonderful stories. It's just as much fun for me than anything else. So I appreciate having you accept me out on the road, and it's been fun. It's been great doing this podcast. I want to make sure that people check out Frank Mills wherever you can. If you see Frank coming to your town, make sure you buy a ticket, because it's well worth the money, and I think you'd really, really enjoy it. And frankmills.com, and you can find out information on Frank, and he's on you're on Facebook too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, all those good things.
Yeah.
And make sure you reach out and say hello, and I hope everyone enjoyed this podcast. And once again, thanks, Frank, for being here, and looking forward to the next couple shows. And it's been a pleasure.
Darren, it's always a pleasure for me. I've been lucky enough to be associated with so many people who are not just ending up as announcers, interviewers, whatever, but become friends. And I consider you part of that. And it's really fun to answer your questions, because you know just as much about the business as I do, and we're both creative in it. And it's a delight for me to chat with you and to be with you and have you on our tours, because of that friendship and that understanding that goes beyond most people's comprehension. You know, music is it's not a simple art.
No.
So those questions that you asked were delightful to answer them.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate it.
Delighted.
Well, let's go get some dinner, and
Bingo.
Thanks again. We'll say goodbye to everybody. Thanks
Goodbye,
a lot.
folks.